21st, 2005. We're at the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, Georgia, and we have Mrs. Peggy Paullin with us today, the former wife or widow of Dr. Bud Paullin, who's a legendary physician in the city of Atlanta, along with his uncle, Dr. J. Edgar Paullin, who helped found Piedmont Hospital. And Ms. Paullin is going to describe to us what it was like growing up in New England. I know that's a long way away from most of us in the South, and what happened during the Depression when Pearl Harbor Day came along, and how she got involved in the military, and where she met her husband, and what they did, and a little bit about life in general. And we're just honored and delighted to have you with us today, Peggy.
Thank you.
Go ahead. You're on.
The Depression years were very difficult in New England because they had so many mills and factories, and people were not buying the goods, and it was a very sad period in that time. I remember going to Boston when I was a young girl, about 10 or 11, and seeing the soup kitchens, and I just couldn't believe that long lines of people would be standing there, and their spirits were so sad. They looked so depressed and unhappy, and I felt so sorry for them. And following that time, my parents moved to Cape Cod at Howard, Mass. And that was rural, and people had gardens, and it wasn't as sad as being in the cities where people really could not get adequate meals. We muddled through the Depression like all people do, and as a result, families were very, very close, all for one and one for all, because that was the only way you would survive. I marvel later, during the hippie age, where people would just take off and not have families or anything. They could get free medical care and all the other things, which we certainly didn't have, and we needed our families more, which strengthened our generation, I think, tremendously. And we're happy for that. Of course, there were deprivations that we had. We couldn't get a new dress when we wanted one, or we had to wait our time. But we survived, and we came out stronger for it. I graduated from high school in 1939, and I remember having to write an essay about whether we would ever go to war with Germany. And I wrote, no, that I didn't think it was possible that we would ever go to war. We seemed so secure in our country. In Japan, really, I don't think it was in the newspaper, but I don't think we ever thought we would ever go to war with them either. So it all, and it was a period of 39, things were looking better economically. My sister became a teacher, and I decided I didn't want to teach school, and the other option was to be a secretary, and I didn't want to be a secretary. And I always enjoyed medicine, and so I wanted to become a nurse, which I did. And I went to Lawrence Memorial Hospital in Medford and completed it in 1943. During the last year of my training, Japan invaded Pearl Harbor, which all of you that are alive now can remember what a horrible, horrible, tragic event that was in our lives. And from that on, the world changed, and we changed with it. After graduation, I worked for about 6 months at Cape Cod Hospital, and then 5 of my friends called me and said that they were going to join the service, the Army Nurse Corps, and asked me if I would join with them, and they promised to keep us together as a unit, and they wouldn't be separated. So in 1944, we went to Camp Kilmer, and then sailed from New York aboard the Queen Elizabeth to go to the United Kingdom. As the Queens went very fast, and we didn't have any escort. We just zigzagged across the ocean to avoid any torpedoes. We landed safely and went to landed in Scotland, took a train to a hospital location, Blandford Forum, in the southwestern part of England, fairly on the coast. And it was a 198 General Hospital. When we arrived, the hospital wasn't set up. It had been a British barracks, and their troops had been sent overseas, so it was open. So in less than 2 weeks, we changed an old, dirty British barracks into a general hospital. I now marvel at the speed and efficiency that the Americans did to turn that barracks into a thriving hospital in less than 2 weeks, operating rooms and all. It was about a 250-bed hospital, and we did all. Being a general hospital, we treated everything that was sent to us, orthopedics and wounds of every description.
Sorry.
It was a very orderly flow of patients that came in at that time, and we had a record that we didn't have a death in all the time we were there, which we were all very proud of. We were at we continued as the hospital until during the war we saw many patients from various battles, and the Battle of the Bulge, which we really thought was sort of war was over, we had innumerable patients come in from there, and they would all kinds of frostbitten feet and things like that, which we treated. And I was only 22 at that time, but they must have been 17 and 18, because I thought that particular group looked so young to us. But they were great, great patients. All of our patients were very appreciative, and they all had such good humor. I don't ever remember anybody being grumpy or causing any problem. They were just so grateful to be treated and to have such good care. And some had to go back, and some went on home with their injuries. I really wanted to give so much credit to our medical orderlies. They were just tremendous. They did so well, and they were so dedicated, and they were just a marvelous help to the personnel there.
Peggy, could I ask you, do you remember what antibiotics were available to you at that time? You had sulfur.
No, we had sulfur. We didn't have penicillin.
We didn't have penicillin yet.
No, but to diverge a little, the first time we used penicillin was in Boston at the medical center. And when the patients would urinate, they would distill the urine to retrieve the penicillin from their urine because it was in such great demand.
But that was after the war.
That was after the war.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No,
I just was
that's all
wondering,
right.
but you only had sulfur drugs. You didn't have tetracycline or chloramphenicol or anything like that we take for granted later on.
I think one of the reasons they were young, they were hardy, and they were in good condition, most of them. Yeah. Where in general, nowadays we treat people who are sometimes very ill and have a harder time recovering. The VJ Day sort of came out of the blue, and we were all delighted that that had come about. And could you turn off a second?
Sure.
Let me get my thoughts.
Okay.
BJ Day was just a tremendous day. London went wild. Unfortunately, we couldn't go to London because the transportation was nil in those days. It was difficult to find a place, and we could go by train, but the trains were all full. We had people celebrating. So we celebrated in our own way at the Officers Club. After VJ Day, we had a surplus of medical personnel. And they didn't know what to do with this. So all of the nurses were going to be sent to the Pacific to be on duty there. And the physicians were all scattering. And so I had was dating and fell in love with a Captain, William Paullin, Jr., MD, and we were planning on getting married when we went back to the States. But our plans were changed when I knew that I was going to the Pacific and he was going to the Army of Occupation in Germany. Married nurses were exempt from going to the Pacific and would go to the Belgium. So I figured that we could at least be near each other in Belgium and Germany and wouldn't have a long separation. So we married July 20th, 1945 at St. James Church in Blandford, England, with all of our medical personnel with us. Our captain loaned us his car and driver, and we went on a honeymoon to Torquay, England. After a week we returned and waiting further orders when the unexpected happened again. The atomic bomb was dropped in Japan, and so all orders were changed again. My husband, Rudd, was still supposed to go to the Army of Occupation, but because he decided to take a later plane, his schedule was changed and he went to a different outfit, Pine Tree Division, that was going back to the States. So I also went back to the States, and so we had a 1-month separation, which instead of a number of years that we thought would happen. So we were delighted, and we've had a 45-year happy marriage. She is now deceased. The period after the war was one of tremendous change. The GI Bill of Rights was a godsend to so many people that hadn't finished their education. I went back to Simmons College and 2 years at Simmons College, and also 1 year at Agnes Scott. My husband, Rudd, went to New England Medical Center, and he finished his residency there. Then he went to a general hospital in West Virginia. Do you want to ask me anything about it?
Why don't we say that he worked at the New England Medical Center with Samuel Prodger, who had also graduated from Emory University School of Medicine in 1926, just about one of its first graduates after Atlanta Medical College had been taken over by Emory and had its name changed. And Sam went to the New England...
Do you want to say that?
I'm saying it.
Oh, good.
And went to the New England Medical Center, so there was a Atlanta-Boston connection that was established where there were a lot of people who went up there and trained, as Rudd did after the war.
There was sort of a steady stream and got a very good education. When we went, it was very, very difficult to get housing up there. It was at a premium, but because of Dr. Prodger, he was able to get us a very baronial apartment on Beacon Street with a Jacobean furniture. The table was so large we had to slide the salt and pepper shakers back and forth to the table. After coming home, it wasn't that great, more modest quarters. We enjoyed Boston, had a tremendous snowstorm. We couldn't afford to put our automobile in a heated garage, so we left it outdoors in a parking lot, and the snow was so tremendous that year that it was covered for 3 months, and we didn't see the car until the spring thaw when It was an old Chevrolet, but it backed right out and started without any trouble, and we had a car again. I think to talk about the feelings of people, it was I may have used the word upbeat, but it was a very upbeat generation. I don't think complained about things because, as David said, we had already gone through the worst with the Depression, so we appreciated what we had more. And when we came home, everybody was very eager to start their lives. And I'm still surprised to know later when I've talked to people, and I've known them 10 or 15 years, something would come up in a conversation, and you would find out that they had been a prisoner of war under horrible circumstances for 4 or 5 years, and yet they never mentioned it. It had to come from some other person mentioning it, that the war was forgotten and people moved on. I sort of feel sorry for the people who served in the Vietnam and the Korean War, because I don't think they had it was a more difficult war with different feelings, and I think they came home to a much more difficult time than we did. Our friends, we moved into a small house on Forest Trail in Atlanta, and all our neighbors were young and doing the same, and they were almost 100% veterans in every house, because we were able to get GI loans for our houses, and all the people worked diligently and became so successful in their lives with their families and financially, and it was a wonderful period to grow up in. We had a good time. The backyard barbecues had just come in, and we had hot dogs and hamburgers and beer, and we socialized constantly on the weekends, because we were all door-to-door neighbors. And the period of, we had, Roy and I had 3 children, one born, William III, born in 1950, Taylor Paullin, 52, and James Paullin in 54. And none of them chose to become physicians because they said Daddy worked too hard. Well, Daddy did work hard. In those days, you were on every weekend as well as duty. You had a half a day off Thursday and a half a day off Saturday. But you never got Thursday off, as I found out when I would make plans to do something on Thursday. You did get the Saturday afternoon off, but then you were on call. It's hard to remember a time when physicians answered their own phone on the weekend if they were there, and took messages and went on house calls to see patients. But people now have it a little easier, thank heavens, because it was a very rigorous time of duty, and I think the people now realize that they need a little bit more respite.
Did you practice nursing after the war?
No.
Became a housewife and raised 3 children?
I considered it, and looking back, I wish I had. But the women did not work after that. And that's another thing that has so changed. I did volunteer work at Piedmont Hospital, which I enjoyed, and I worked at the Florence Crittenden Home, and I did volunteer work, and I enjoyed gardening, enjoyed my home, and I'm still in the same home that I've lived in for 50 years.
Yes,
So,
sir.
so in the time when everybody moves every 5 years, that it's something. And I hope to live in it a little longer before I have to decide to go to a smaller place.
When you went to England with the nursing corps, were there still air raids going on in England?
Yes, they weren't attacking the coast, but when we were issued helmets and gas masks, and also a pistol belt. They didn't give us any pistols, but we would hear the roar of the bombers going over after bombing London and flying over the coast back to Germany. And this was 2 months after D-Day, when we were stationed there. I read saw the movie The Longest Day, and in the book they said the movie said the German Air Force was almost non-existent, but they were flying over the earth, and if they would lighten a plane to save gas, and they would drop bombs just in no particular place, just to lighten their bombs before they flew over the border, and that you could be bombed that way, but accidentally rather than a target. We did have military bases near us. We were near Bristol, England, and so they could have been targets. But at that time, I really think after a couple of months, we felt very safe over there. England is a beautiful, beautiful, the coast of England is a beautiful place. We were on double daylight standard time. So if we didn't get dark until about 12 o'clock at night, and after that, the skies were so black because there were no lights around, and I remember thinking of the most beautiful skies I've ever seen. We had most of our social life at the officers' club. We didn't have any hard liquor. We just could have warm beer, and occasionally somebody would break out the 100% proof alcohol, and we would mix it with purple grape juice, which was just looking at it, you had to really want to drink badly to want to consume that concoction. But I know we did on VJ Day and after the Pacific defeat. We all drank heartily of that concoction. We didn't mingle with the British people very much. It was transportation was difficult. We all bought bicycles when we first arrived, and anywhere we wanted to go, we either walked or went on bicycles. And it was hilly over there, so you had to be pretty hardy to get around. There was a little, very small tea room that was with a thatched roof, and I've been from New England like tea, so I would persuade Rod to join me to go down to the little thatched roof tea room and have tea and scones by bikes. But he didn't like it as much because they had about 4 dogs that weren't house trained. And it was a little older, but it was some place to go that wasn't completely GI. Food was scarce, and we felt our food was ample, and we felt that we didn't want to take food away from the British, who really had very little food. The chief vegetable green cabbage. We had all the cabbage that we could eat, and that was, if you went out, they had just the diet was very, you didn't eat too well even in London when you're fortunate enough to get up to London.
The British always said that the problems with the American GI was that he was overpaid, oversexed,
and over there.
And I would suspect the British women were delighted to see American women, or the British men were delighted to see some American women coming over there.
Coming over there too to get, I think maybe as a medical unit we stayed very close together.
Did you get to see any of the bombing results of the early bombing raids on London and Bristol? Bristol, I think, was pretty much devastated during the war.
And the Salisbury Cathedral, London. Of course, we were always there in complete blackouts, except right at the very end. But it was utter destruction. You've seen pictures of it. It's all what you see is really right there. Rudd and I went back to visit Blandford about 25 years later, enjoyed going back to seeing all the old sites. And we, of course, went back to London. And of course, it's so dramatically changed. But it really was a horrible, and we hope and pray that, I know we're at war in Iraq right now, and I feel so sorry for the men and women. That too has changed about the women being at war, which I never thought I'd see happen. But I feel sorry for them at that war. I think, every said, the aftermath of the wars are probably the hardest, trying to maintain a government for the people, and people who were in the war of occupation in Germany said that was a very difficult period of their lives, trying to, sometimes they're resented, oftentimes resented, and yet you're trying to restore the government. From what I read, Japan seemed to be very glad to have us there, but we, of course, we rebuilt so much of Japan for them that they probably were glad to have.
I'm sure they were.
My sister, after the war, went to Japan and taught in Japan, and she had a little dog named Scotia, and she had to watch Scotia very, very carefully because the delicacy was a dog meat, and so they were. Everybody suffers.
Peggy, all of you lost friends and a lot of you lost family during World War II. Do you remember the general feeling of the people like yourself and Rudd who must have lost acquaintances and friends during the war? Was it just something you accepted was going to happen, or was each one a personal loss for you?
Thankfully, I didn't lose any immediate members. I lost many friends. My graduation from high school in Harwich in '39. 5 of my friends were killed. So we had friends who were engaged to people and were waiting to get married, lost theirs, loved ones. But I feel fortunate that none of my immediate family were killed.
The feelings of what's right and wrong after Japan invaded Pearl Harbor, you kind of knew what was right and what you wanted to do. Do you think that we'll ever see a time where the country will be that united again? We've had 9/11 in the United States in the last few years, and yet there's a lot of controversy about whether or not we should be fighting in Iraq right now.
I don't think, talking to the younger generation, I don't think maybe if we were invaded, because 9/11 to me was an invasion, but that was a personal feeling. I think what you wrote in the note that you sent me, that everybody, we have to reflect on. You remember what you wrote? I thought you did it.
I did write it.
Yeah, I thought it was very well. That war is subjective, and now maybe people think that we would all like to think there's a better way of handling it, because the civil wars that are going on in this now, in Rwanda and in Nigeria, it is so pitiful and painful that we cannot solve our problems. And I wish there were an answer, but I think Vietnam War, I think so many people questioned whether we should be there or not. Where World War II, there wasn't any questioning. Everybody, I don't remember. I mean, and I think that divided the country. And it made us think it's not all right or all wrong. We have to think about these things and proceed very carefully to a war.
Before Pearl Harbor, the majority of the people in the United States were still in favor of our not getting involved in the war. And it took Pearl Harbor to bring us around to a consensus feeling that what was right was to go to war against Japan and Germany. But until that happened, we weren't sure that was the right thing to do.
No, we were very isolationists. And I don't think in my family or where I got any feedback, I think they remembered World War I. I had an uncle who was gassed in World War I, and I remember he didn't live, but he had very difficulty speaking, and so I remember seeing him and wondering if it was, and I think, but my parents probably, my father did not serve in World War I because he had 2 children and was exempt. But I think the World War I and the gassing of World War I and the trenches, it must have been so horrible war. And with the memories of that, they just didn't, it's like our generation doesn't want to go into another war. But I'm sure they didn't want to. And we are, there are people who wonder if we couldn't have handled Japan better and have avoided the war.
What's the happiest memory other than getting married to Brud over in England do you recall? What do you recall about your encounter with the wounded soldiers that was happy? Was it?
Oh, they were great. They really were. They were just full of fun. They never. They had one patient that was in our ward. Was shot. Wish I could. Well, I can show you. Was shot. He was yelling for his troops. He was a sergeant and yelling for his troops to come forward, and had his mouth wide open, and a bullet pierced his cheeks and came out on the other side, and he was chewing a wad of gum, and the wad of gum got embedded in his cheek, even though the bullet went right out. And I remember he was just, I'm so glad that just missed. And if they always looked around and saw somebody else that was, and so they were a great, great, great group of people. I can't say enough for our soldiers during that war. Then some of them went back to duty. Did I mention the Battle of the Bulge?
You mentioned the fact that you got a lot of young people over from the Battle of the Bulge.
They must have been really, or our particular group of patients looked like 17 years old. I said I was all of 22, which wasn't that ancient, but I remember thinking, oh, they're so young. I'm so glad they came back, because the Battle of the Bulge was just a sad state of affairs.
How big was your hospital? Do you remember?
250 beds.
250 beds. And did you have operating rooms at the hospital where you could do?
Yes. Oh.
And with sulfa as the main drug you had,
the main drug.
You did orthopedic surgery, reparative surgery, like on the mouth of the sergeant who had the wad of gum embedded in there. You remember how many operating rooms you had?
We had 4.
You had 4 operating rooms.
And they were kept, it was, they must have handled this extremely well, and with enough hospitals and enough enlisted and volunteers to handle this in a very orderly fashion. That wasn't like if you've seen MASH, it wasn't at all like MASH. You would get them in, and you always had beds for them, and you always had operating. They never had to wait. It was, and I'd like to know, and I don't, how many general hospitals we had in England.
I have no idea. What kind of shifts would you work? Would you work 24 hours or 8 hours or 12 hours?
We worked 8-hour shifts.
8-hour shifts, so you had enough nursing personnel
enough
to
nursing
work.
personnel.
You had 8 hours on and 16 hours off. Would you work 5 days a week or 7 days a week?
We worked 6 days a week.
6 days a week, so you had 1 day a week on. Did Broad have the same kind of schedule, or was he working
About the same.
About the same. So you really had defined working hours by the time you were over there, which is a blessing that you.
Toward the end, we had 5 days because there was the patient load went down.
Yes. You mentioned the food. You were eating primarily American food while you were there and not British food. You were leaving the spuds for them.
We had like dehydrated potatoes. We didn't eat too well either, but at least it was filling. We didn't, it was, surprisingly, the nurses all gained weight because I think we were eating mostly carbohydrates, very little meat. A big day was to have mutton, and it was not lamb, it was mutton. It was so strong that people said they would never eat mutton again. It was very, but we had a PX, so we had all the candy bars we wanted, so we could eat bars. That's where we gained our weight, Hershey bars, and all the cigarettes we wanted.
Did everybody smoke?
A number of people smoked. I was not smoking, but you could, and our group, the people I know didn't deal in the black market, but I wonder if I'm sure that it might have been a temptation for people who didn't smoke to.
Did you have any buzz bomb experience for any of the buzz bombs in your area at all?
No buzz bombs.
You were lucky because they were hitting London during the period of time that you were over there.
We were about 60 miles from London.
Yeah, you were south.
Yes.
South of London is where you were. What lessons do you recall from the war? I don't mean lessons, but what feelings do you feel were molded as a result of your World War II experience? I commented to you earlier, I don't interview anybody up here from your generation who's bitter about anything. You all seem to be thankful for what you have as opposed to being bitter about what you don't have.
I think we felt that we had a mission, and we thought it was the right mission, and to get over there and get it done and come home and resume our lives. I think the lessons, the true heroes, as we all know, are the ones who gave the ultimate sacrifice, and their families, and the wounded who had severe wounds and lost an arm or a leg. I think you could never think of yourself or anything you did as being important when you consider the ultimate that they gave. And this just isn't just, it comes from my heart when I say that, because they were so courageous and so dedicated and felt that they would do it, and they were. Hitler had to be defeated. He had to be. We learned so much more about the concentration camps, and I'm surprised that we didn't know about. I don't know whether you how we could not know about them, is surprising to me.
Sometimes we're slow learners.
Uh-huh.
We all are.
Or the information didn't
Yeah.
come out to us. Yeah.
We probably got some information, but nobody wanted to believe it was as horrible as it was, because we didn't, in our wildest imagination, think that that could be occurring, even when the story started coming out. I don't think it was until after the war when we...
Till we actually saw the pictures. The inhumanity against man was inconceivable. It really
Inconceivable.
was.
And still goes on in some areas of the world today.
It still does. Are we a violent, human people, violence? I mean, we violent prone? Is there a genetic gene? Or is there something in us that want to be aggressive?
There's something that doesn't always work.
Something that,
Otherwise, we wouldn't end up in the situations
over
we're in.
and over again.
Over and over
Something
again.
to learn.
Is there anything else you'd like to say?
I would like to thank David Lowens for doing this, because he is doing a great, great job, and I would not be here doing this if it weren't for him and his volunteer work to get this
Well,
done.
this is about our being appreciative of you and Brud and your generation for making it possible for people like me to go to E-River School while you over in England fighting the wars for us.
And history, I'm now being 83, and I'm beginning to realize I'm really, when the 50 furniture is coming back into style, I realize that history proceeds at a great pace, and if we don't get this down, that what I think is old hat, it really, what I did is not important, but the feelings, I'm sure, it is good to record our history, and I hope anybody who hears this will think about saving letters, which I have saved letters of the war, and the VJ the letters that were all printed, so interesting. That how, and the civilians, God bless them, they did a tremendous job. They really, you cannot say enough about them too. They worked overtime. They built the factories, planes. I mean, they did a sensational job, and without them, we would not have won the war either.
That's true.
Thank you.
Peggy, thank you so very
Did I
much.
talk
You've
too
been-
much?
No, you were absolutely outstanding, and once again, on behalf of my generation and future generations, we express our sincere appreciation to you.
Thank you.